This is just a brief outline of what I want to be talking about. The new viruses that are invading our country or showing up in our country is probably a better way of saying that. We have a hole in the dike. We need to discuss that a little bit, how we're going to plug it. We need to talk about surveillance. Mention some of the surveillance tools that we have out there that we need to emphasize and utilize better. Problem solving, how are we going to plug this hole? If we don't, we're going to be in big trouble. Then I'm going to switch to enteric coronaviruses, present just an overview of PED and Delta Corona, and finish up, talk a little bit about vaccines control, and then finish up on the most recent Delta Corona data. We have a group of us have worked together, and we fulfilled Koch's postulates in conventional pigs and sows. So with that, the viruses that we have showing up at our doorstep. The coronavirus is PED, porcine Delta Corona. Porcine Toro, that's been around for a while, but if you look at the signature of it, it does have a foreign signature to it. Other viruses that have showed up at our doorstep that we really don't know how they got here, but they're here, would be a novel circovirus that has an Asian signature to it. NROG, that's here. Once again, it's got a foreign signature to it. And so these are viruses that are coming from across the world. The world has got a whole bunch of other viruses that we don't want to get. Classical swine fever, foot and mouth disease. If these lesser viruses are showing up at our doorstep, at what point in time are these major viruses going to show up? The ones that are going to be real game changers. There's a hole in the dike. We need to figure out where it is and how we're going to plug it or change the effects of it if it does show up. So, solving the problem. We live in a very, very small global community. What's theirs is soon going to be ours, and vice versa. We've shared a lot of different viruses with other countries, given them things that they didn't necessarily want, and what goes around comes around. So somehow we need to figure out on an international basis a surveillance plan that allows us and them to conduct pathway analysis. How are these bugs getting into the country? What can we do? How do we surveil for it and track all this stuff down? It needs to be done at an international level because, like I say, this is a global community, and a small one at that. We really need to emphasize what's going on in our nation, but also in our hemisphere. And within the United States, we actually are starting to get some of those tools together. The National Animal Health Laboratory Network, working with the government, working with the diagnostic labs, working with the swine industry, and the professional groups within. So things are starting to happen, but we probably need to get this a little bit more formal and a little better organized throughout the world. We have quite a variety of surveillance tools that we probably don't make effective use of, but they're out there and they're actually predictive tools. And the first one that I would point out is the scientific literature. Most of the bugs that have shown up in the US, we actually had forewarning that they were out there and circulating. And all we needed to do was pay attention to what the literature was telling us. If you look closely, we had forewarning of PED. There was some forewarning of Delta Corona. These novel circoviruses have been described and tracked as they evolve in their country of origin. We just need to really be out and paying attention. There's some other emerging diseases out there, some of our old favorites like cytorabies, that are causing some issues in some of these other countries. So pay attention to what the literature is saying, be forewarned. Some of the tools that we have, traditional tools right now, PCR, it's amazing how quickly with a little bit of forewarning and a little bit of information, how quickly we can develop effective PCR assays. PED, when that first showed up, none of us really had good real-time PCR assays at the moment that it was first diagnosed in the U.S., but within 2 weeks after it was really confirmed, every diagnostic lab independently developed some pretty good assays, and they're in use. So we've got some good tools. We've got good people that can develop the tools to surveil. But we also have some other tools that are just coming online at the diagnostic labs that are really, really going to be valuable, but they're also going to generate more questions than we have answers. And that would be next generation sequencing, deep sequencing. When you start to look at what nucleic acid signatures are in samples from clinical cases, you're going, holy cow, what is that? Where did this come from? Is this a cofactor in the disease? What's going on? But it's a tool that we're just getting experience with and starting to use. And the price on next-gen sequencing is actually coming down. We can do a whole genome for about $300. Minnesota is doing the same thing. All the diagnostic labs are starting to take care of this, or take advantage of this new technology. So we're going to be answering a lot of questions, but we're also going to be generating questions as well. Other tools that we have that are okay, but we need to improve upon, is answer the question of infective or not. Just the presence of nucleic acid does not mean that it's an infectious agent. So we need to develop better tools to actually monitor infectivity and to understand infectivity. A sample of PED in a 2-day-old pig is probably going to give a different titer than in a baby pig versus an older pig versus a cell culture system versus PCR. How does it all relate? We don't really understand all that at the moment, but we'll get that all figured out. The other thing that we need is a bioassay that's as sensitive as a pig, but isn't a pig. Some of the in vitro organ systems. How do we develop those? Organ culture with the GI tract. There's other systems out there that we really need to start investigating. And some of that work is being done. Solving the problems, we need to work together to solve these problems. We need leadership, not finger pointing. We all recognize that this is a problem and we need to figure it out. It's not an insurmountable problem, it's a huge problem, but we need to figure out how to work together to solve this problem. The industry, the swine industry, is most at risk, and they're the ones who really need to take the leadership in that area. We have a vested interest in solving this problem. It needs to be done at, once again, we have international swine consulting veterinarians that travel the world that see things up front and personal. They need to be doing a better job of communicating. We've got good organizations like the AASV, MPB. They are already providing good leadership as far as these emerging diseases. Good communication, but we could probably do a little better. I put vaccine companies in here because in the grand scheme of things, if we know that a disease is out there and we know there's a likelihood of it showing up in our country, we need to have something ready to use to protect against it. We need to work closely with the vaccine companies, or the vaccine companies need to work closely with these other organizations, these other groups, to be prepared to have something parked, ready to break out in the event of one of these agents showing up. Last but not least, we need to all work with the government. USDA plays a major, major role in animal health, in surveillance. They have tools internationally as well as nationally, with major emphasis on making our food supply secure and safe. But we can probably do a little bit more. We can do a better job of communicating. Last but not least is DHS. Their role is to protect us. And actually, the DHS has most of the money relative to USDA. So how do these different agencies share resources for the benefit of our safe food in the nation? There's questions, don't have answers, but these are good discussion points that we need to address. Along those lines, we are actually doing that. So next week there's a conference, an international conference on swine enteric coronavirus diseases, and that is hosted by USDA. They're stepping up and doing a good job, inviting people from across the world to address this. It's supported by the National Pork Board, AASV, the National Pork Producers Council. So things are headed in the right direction. We just want to make sure that they continue to get in the right direction with greater emphasis. So I'm looking forward to this conference. So Delta Corona and PED, I'm going to give more of an overview right now before I get into the specifics with Delta Corona. So these viruses are new to our country within the last couple years, and so just some general characteristics of them. So Paul, this is an official, wherever you are, this is an official PED talk. I'm using the same slides that everyone has used for the last year. Dr. Matt Ackerman has taken some really high impact slides, and this is the disease, whether it's PED or whether it's Delta Corona, it looks the same. TGE as well, epidemic TGE. It's most notable in baby pigs. If you're a young pig and you get it, pretty much dead. Both these viruses and TGE as well are age dependent as far as the severity of the disease. Feeder pigs are not usually lethally infected. The severity is they'll get diarrhea, but they don't die. And the older they are, the milder the symptoms, but they'll still get sick. And all animals, regardless of the age, are subject to infection if they are naive. It's just the severity of the disease. So things that you always say when you give a talk like that after showing these high impact slides, this is a disease of swine. It's a pig disease. It does not get into people. There's no public health concern as far as food safety. PED has been around for a long time. Actually in Europe, up until just recently, it was considered not much of a problem. Initially when it broke in '71, it was an issue, but over the years they've learned to live with it, or the virus has changed. It doesn't seem to be as much. As it went through the Asian countries, it was obviously a real issue. It showed up in Korea, Japan, the Philippines, in China, and it causes real problems there, and also in the U.S. when it showed up here. Porcine Delta Corona is really a new one. We don't know much about it. I'm going to share with you some of the initial pathogenesis data that we generated, and this is the first time in the world that this data has actually been scientifically obtained and shared, so that'll be kind of nice. PED, this virus, it infects very quickly. Incubation time is less than 36 hours, and is shed in, I want to use this term carefully, in feces for 42 days. Not necessarily always shed or always detected, but if you post a pig and look at the GI tract in 42 days post-inoculation in baby pigs, 3-week-old pigs, we can find it. We also find it in lymph nodes. In Delta Corona, we actually did sows, and we can find it in the GI tract of sows 42 days post-inoculation and lymph nodes. So it's there. Is it infectious? We don't know. We've got to figure that out. Vomiting, diarrhea. Like I said, this virus will infect all ages of swine. It's only really lethal in the young ones. Laboratory confirmation really is critical. You hear about these first wave, second wave, third wave infections. Is it all PED? Is it PED and then Delta Corona? Is it PED and S1 variant? I mean, we do need the diagnostic laboratories to really confirm what's going on with these viruses. And they all have unique signatures. And Excuse me. And we can readily identify them. And don't forget TGE. It's out there, and it's a problem. One last thing is, even though these are all coronaviruses, there is no cross-protection between any of these coronaviruses. Continuing on solving the problem, I'm happy to say that the laboratories and the NALM network are getting together and sharing information. Every week we get updates as far as the swine enteric coronaviruses. Having said that, I would also say that the data that they present is only as good as the data that they get. So is good reporting always being done? That's a touchy thing. I'm not going to go any further. So, current picture of PED in the United States. So this is just in the U.S., obviously, in Canada, and our neighbors to the south. Delta Corona is a similar picture, probably identical to PED, it's just not as well recognized. This graph, I think, is the one that we all really need to be paying attention to. This is last year. This is the fall and winter. Right now, we're in that phase in the graph. What's going to happen this winter, this fall and winter? I think nobody knows. We can't look into our crystal ball, and we're all very, very anxious as to what's going to happen. I'd like to be really, really optimistic and say, well, we've got things under control. But I think back to when I was first told about how devastating PED was when we were on a scientific exchange with colleagues in China. And all the researchers there and all the federal laboratories, they said, this is a seasonal disease, and it's really, really nasty. So we're heading into that season. I hope we don't see it, but it wouldn't surprise me if we do. And how bad is it going to be? Vaccines, control of this disease, immunity. We can generate an immune response that will effectively control it, at least to a degree. I'm going to call that mucosal priming for this discussion. And mucosal priming basically is infection of a pig or immune stimulation at a mucosal surface. The easiest way to do that with the tools that we have right now is to actually infect the pig. And the pregnant dams will generate a lactogenic immune response and protect their offspring. Currently, we use tissue-derived inocula for most of those events that we are exposing our animals. And with that, remember the deep sequencing that I was talking about? Well, if you look at some of these inocula that you are feeding back to your pigs, you're surprised at what else you're giving them. There's been a number of reports that maybe there's other things that tagged along with the inocula that you gave your animals that you probably didn't want in there. So just for controversy as much as anything, what would happen if you isolate the virus in cell culture and just give them a single virus? Would that be better? What are the pros, what are the cons on doing something like that? So food for thought. I'm not saying that's what we should do, but we can probably make a cleaner inocula for these controlled infections. Vaccines, I think the way that we're going to need to control this disease is induction of mucosal immunity and the generation of a lactogenic immune response. I've already indicated that the best way to do that is to actually infect these animals at the mucosal surface, so you will get the generation of a mucosal response. Turn on the right arm of the mucosal or the immune system, not just systemic immunity. So that's mucosal priming. Things that, and in the field, With controlled infections, you get a lot of different hearsay as to what's important, when to do this, what's the age of the animal, if it's a young animal, a feeder pig that's been infected, do they have a protective response when they finally farrow and their piglets are allowed to milk. There's observations, but there hasn't really been good controlled studies. Gestational status at the time of infection, how important is that? We don't know. We hear a lot of different things, but there really haven't been controlled studies to address those issues. Boosting. Do we need to boost these animals once they've been exposed? And the example I would give that maybe not would be respiratory coronavirus, respiratory TGE. All that is TGE that's lost the receptor. It no longer infects the GI tract, but it does a good job of infecting the respiratory tract, induces an immune response, and we are not boosting those animals, but for all practical purposes, once it showed up, TGE disappeared. Not totally, but it changed the whole perspective of the disease. So once again, I'm generating questions as much as I'm doing anything. Duration of immunity, that goes along with the boosting. Is there a need? We don't know. I'm pleased to say that the vaccine companies, two in particular, have been very, very proactive. We have conditional licenses that have just been relatively recently been issued. Zoetis has just got a conditional, I think it's a classical killed vaccine, and that can be used as a boostering vaccine and probably be really effective in animals that have already seen the bug. Harris Vaccines has had one for a period of time now, and that's an RNA vectored platform that I'm not sure exactly what they put in it. I think it's S1, but I don't know exactly. And that's been around for a while, both as a private use, I don't forget the exact term for that, but now also as a federally licensed conditional, and I think it's soon to get full licensure. So there is effort. The vaccine companies, some of the vaccine companies are taking a leadership role. I think that's great. The thing that I would point out is these are systemic immune induction vaccines rather than ones that actually generate a mucosal response. I think what we probably need is either a live vaccine or a vectored vaccine that will infect and induce mucosal immunity at the mucosal surface. I truly believe that's what we're going to need to get a good handle on PED. Classical vaccine production right now, garbage disposal with bioreactor generated virus, gut homogenate. Timing is everything. If you get pigs that have already expelled the virus, you're not really getting much of a yield from them. So, plus there's other things that come along with this. It works, it's not the best solution. Okay, so now I'll share with you brand new data. We have fulfilled Koch's postulates in conventional animals being sows and their nursing pigs. The goal of this project was to look at where the virus replicates, look at shedding, look at how long the virus is maintained in these animals, look at antibody production, and also see if we can get a handle on if there's aerosol transmission or not. This is truly a team effort. Folks at my lab at the Kansas State Veterinary Diagnostic Lab worked with folks at the UNL Diagnostic Lab. That's where we did the actual experiments. We also worked with Eric Nelson at South Dakota State. He had some inocula and has generated tools. It's truly a team effort, and it's a great team to work with. Thanks to the National Pork Board for sponsoring this work. And we'll share some preliminary data. This isn't final data by any shape, way, or form. The study itself was done in a BSL-2 lab at the University of Nebraska. And the science annex, experimental design is 10 pregnant sows and their litters the litters being inoculated at 2 days of age, as the sows were. Experimental groups are the inoculated piglets, group A. Contact controls of that litter, group B. Group C are aerosol controls, that are sows and baby pigs in the same room with a curtain in between the farrowing crates, but a common air source to see if aerosol transmission can occur. And then obviously we had a negative control, a source control, to make sure that we had pure clean animals. So as I said, inoculation occurred of baby pigs and their dams. So it's a fairly good study. It was designed to be more of a pathogenesis type study. So we have sequential sacrifice as part of the study. The challenge itself is a fecal pool. This is material that we got from Eric, and this is one of 2 pools that we tested. And the first one didn't work. We didn't get any recoverable virus. CT on this material was, what, 15, 17, in that range. Should have been a lot of virus there, but when we stuck it into 2-day-old milk replacer pigs, we didn't get anything to take off. Now, the other inocula that we tried, we did get some virus. It did cause a severe infection. We passaged it 2 additional times to generate enough material so we would have enough inocula to do this study. So this is actually 2 to 6 day old passaged material to get enough inocula to do the study. And that was done in conventionally derived pigs that were fed milk. The inocula that we used had, by the time it was diluted up, had a real-time PCR titer, and I use that term very loosely, very, very loosely, of 22. So there's a lot of nucleic acid there. It turns out there's a lot of virus there too. The nursing pigs and their dams were challenged. The pigs were right at 2 days of age when they were challenged, intranasally as well as orally, 5 mils. They were blowing some pretty good bubbles by the time we were done giving it to them out of their nose. We collected at different points in time. So this is a 42-day study. We were really heavy on the early end as far as sample collection. As I said, this is more of a pathogenesis type study that we're trying to define where the virus is replicating. So we collected, and we sacrificed a lot of pigs and collected a lot of samples. And early on, we had a lot of pigs die. So our numbers kind of were light by the end of the study. We collected blood with nasal swabs, fecal swabs, sequential sacrifice in the different groups. And then as the surviving pigs got older, we also collected oral fluid, so we'd have a feel for how good of diagnostic samples we can get. We also look at quite a variety, a spectrum of tissues to look where the virus replicates or does not replicate. So what do we see following inoculation? Sows develop soft feces about 2 days post-inoculation, and diarrhea 3 days post-inoculation. They were all clinically normal by 8 days post-inoculation. The aerosol controls, now 2 different things happened. We had one crazy sow that broke out of her pen, her farrowing crate, and made nose-to-nose contact the night of the first study. So that wasn't a true aerosol, but it was a contact control. She and her pigs got infected, 2 days later. So highly transmissible. That would have just been nose contact. And there wasn't a whole lot of virus being shed at that point in time either. This is 1 day post-inoculation. The other aerosol control, that one actually did work as an aerosol control, and it broke 2 days later. So there seems to be, and I hesitate to use the term aerosol transmission, but there certainly was no direct contact with a barrier in between, and these animals did become infected. The non-infected negative control stayed negative. That's good. Piglets, a very similar picture. 2 days post-inoculation is when they became clinically ill. Morbidity, 100%. Mortality, it was slightly variable. 2 of the litters had 100% mortality. Other litters tended to be not as much of a lethal infection. And just an observation, the aerosol control group that got infected when they were 5-6 days of age, they had the least mortality. So is there an age-dependent mortality here? We don't know, but it's, you know, worth further pursuit. Aerosol controls, or the contact controls, basically they develop diarrhea, clinical disease a day or 2 days after the inoculated animals. Clinical disease, for the most part, was over at 12 days post-inoculation, and the negative controls stay clean the whole study. All right, this is some interesting data. All right, so I'm trying to depict this so you can see it all from the back. It's color-coded, and what we're looking at is fecal swabs. Okay, this column right here, green is good. So, 1 day post-inoculation, we are unable to detect any virus shedding via the fecal or actually nasal routes in these inoculated pigs. I always find that just absolutely intriguing, especially when you put 5 mils of inocula in the nair of a baby pig and they're blowing bubbles. But no detectable virus. Other points in time you can find it, and further out in the infection, well, that's the main point I wanted to make off this slide. 1 day post-inoculation, you can't find the virus via fecal or nasal swabs. Here's the groups and the average PCR type values. I want to use titer. And what they look like. Basically, the inoculated and their contact controls, almost identical curves. The group C aerosol controls, slight delay, but the pattern is virtually identical. Negative stayed that way throughout. That's the fecal data, fecal swab data, nasal swab data, the same pattern, just not as much virus being spewed out. Okay, interesting data here. Remember, green is good. If it's not pure green like this down here, there's virus detected. So this is 1 day post-inoculation. Red is bad. That means lots of virus. CTs in the teens, lots and lots of virus. That is the small intestine. This is spiral colon. You see a little bit there, but not that much. This, right here, where you don't see hardly anything, is descending colon. This right here, we're picking up viremia 1 day within 24 hours at 24 hours post-inoculation, but we're not seeing any fecal shedding at that point in time. We caught the infection just as it's getting into the small intestine, but not yet spewed out of the animal. It's really kind of interesting. Viremia. All right, so we actually have viremic animals through 5 days post-inoculation, and that correlates with the appearance of virus in the GI tract. So it's probably infecting the GI tract and leaking back through, and that's how we're picking up viremia. All right, so this is basically the first 14 days of the study. I'm not going to concentrate on, there's a more in-depth talk that I'll give on Wednesday at the vet school that will go into more detail. But you can find it in a variety of tissues. How real is it? We're determining that right now. But the thing that I found is absolutely fascinating. All right, so this is that same type of data format. This is 42 days post-inoculation. Pure green is good, no virus. If it's a different shade, that means we're finding it via PCR. And 42 days out, we are still finding it in tissues in the GI tract. The other place that we're still finding it is in lymph nodes. And these are baby pigs that were inoculated. Is this infectious virus or not? We don't know. We will find out. Oral fluids, they are a good diagnostic sample. Once the pigs were 2 weeks of age, we started we started collecting oral fluids. That's a bit tricky, but we did collect them. And you can pick it up positive at 14 days, 21 days, 28 days, tapering off about 35 days post-inoculation. But it is a good diagnostic tool. Sow data. We never could pick up viremia in any of the sows. Fecal shedding was very similar to what we saw with baby pigs, as was nasal shedding. And we did post the sows at 35 days post-inoculation. And much to my surprise, in a number of the sows, we could still pick up virus in their GI tract, in the small intestines, and virtually every one of them, we could still detect virus in the lymph nodes at 35 days post-inoculation. That's interesting. What's going on? Is this infectious virus? Can it be transmitted? More questions than answers. Histopath, microscopic lesions, pretty similar to PED. We are in the midst of doing immunohistochemistry to actually look at virus replication in these tissues that were PCR positive. This is 1 day post-inoculation, and your classical villus villus necrosis that's occurring. The virus is getting in and doing it. This is immunohistochemistry. Virtually every enterocyte is infected at 1 day post-inoculation. Continuing on, and this one is a really, really early infection. And we have some weird cells that are lit up. And they're not plasma cells. So this is probably virus replication. We don't know what's going on there. This is why a sequential sacrifice and a pathogenesis work is a valuable thing. Answers that we need to get. Just a higher magnification of immunohistochemistry. It works very well, and I really want to give Eric Nelson a lot of credit here. The antibodies that we are using were developed in his laboratory. So he did this for Delta Corona. He also did a similar thing with, this happens to be a rabbit anti-nucleocapsid, I believe. He did that for PED as well, and monoclones are going to be on their way. So his lab is just always great for providing reagents that are critical to all of us. Antibody response following inoculation. We're mopping up on that. Okay, so let me go back. Tissue and virus localization in the tissues, that is currently underway. We have all these different tissues to stain via immunohistochemistry and see what we can find. Thus far, and we're just that far into that much, we've only been able to find virus in the GI tract and mainly in the small intestine. So this aerosol positive nasal swabs that we're getting, is that truly aerosol transmission, or is it just fecal contamination? We don't know the answer, but right now it doesn't look too promising because we have done IHC on turbinates, lung, trachea on these early infected animals, and they're negative thus far. So, but once again, preliminary data, we haven't completed it all. Antibody response. They do generate a nice antibody response. We're in the throes of characterizing that. We're looking at both indirect fluorescent antibody levels as well as neutralization, true virus neutralization of those same samples. Everything seroconverts by 14 days post-inoculation, so you see a little bit of seroconversion in a few of the animals before that. Our assays are I don't want to, they're not bulletproof yet, so I'm not really prepared to give, the kinetics of antibody response and the magnitude, but that's on its way for both IFA and for SN testing. This is what a standard IFA would look like. Virus-infected cells, and we flood this with dilutions of the serum, convalescent serum post-infection. And so it's a nice signal. We can read it easy. The thing I like about IFAs is if there's a background issue, you can read through the background and you can see specific fluorescence. Unlike ELISAs, that give you, sometimes can give you a false positive. So that's my tool of choice. Neutralization. What we do, our indicator antibody in our SN testing is Eric's rabbit anti-Delta corona serum. A blind man can read these. So it's either going to be there or it's not. It's a nice assay. And I really, really, really need to thank Sabrina Swenson and her colleague Melinda Jenkins-Moore, because they supplied us with the cell culture adapted virus that we're able to use in these assays. And they freely provided that to all of the researchers out there. I would also point out that they were one of the very first ones to isolate PED, and they also provided that virus to the swine community to use as diagnostic tools. These are colleagues that you just love to work with. They're selfless in their giving, and they're USDA. So we have some really good colleagues across the working areas.